When most of us think of the 1920s, from an American standpoint, what we might think of or come to mind was political happiness, prosperity, and social as well as economic equity. But for most Americans during this time period, most of them failed to acknowledge the waging war between the powers of democracy and that of socialism to the east of us. So today, we're going to be talking about what was happening during this time period, but more specifically, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and what lasting impacts and effects the dissolution of the Soviet Union have had 30 years after it happened. And to examine and acknowledge this, we're going to be looking in three key areas of analysis. First, we're going to be talking about how, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there has been increased social equity and prosperity for former members of the Eastern Bloc. Secondly, we're going to be looking at how, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there has been a more accepting political sphere for political ideologies and dissenting opinions. And lastly, we're going to be looking at how, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there has been increased international peace throughout. To begin with, let's talk about how, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there has been a better chance of having prosperity and social equity, social stability and well-being for former nations of the Eastern Bloc. Those nations being comprised, but not limited to, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, so on and so forth. Going on to a statement done by the Washington Post in 2019, what we see is that those nations mentioned and the rest of the remaining 15 nations who are part of the USSR were and still happen to be the 15 poorest nations in Europe. What we see is that these nations, minus Russia, were all subject to cruel treatment and oppressive powers and regimes caused by Soviet rule. And these nations were racked by things such as systematic oppression and overall poverty. Of those nations, minus Russia, every 1 in 4 person in the USSR was experiencing extreme poverty. And additionally, because of the lack of free trade in the nation, there was no way for individuals to pull themselves out of the systematic oppression and poverty, meaning that this pressure was only being perpetuated generationally. Going on, when it comes to systematic oppression, because of the wages being very low and the lack of care being given to the citizens, what we saw is that marginalized and minority groups were also extremely racked by this poverty, including the fact that women were not able to engage in political discourse, and the fact that with the concentration camps in Siberia set up, there was also mass ethnic cleansing going on, sponsored by the state during the reign of the USSR. So with this being the case, we see that with the dissolution of the USSR, not only has there been increased social prosperity, but the wage gaps within these nations have actually rose 19%. We see that these racial ethnic cleansing camps have been completely abolished, and we see a larger prosperity rating for these countries overall. Going on, let's talk about how with the dissolution of the USSR, we see that there has been an overall acceptance for the belief of dissenting opinions politically and socially. Now, according to a statement done by Harvard EDU, we saw that the European nations, the Western ones and the Eastern ones, were all experiencing a time caused by the Red Scare that made us very self-conscious of what beliefs the citizens had. All too often there is a stigmatization caused by the Red Scare that the rise of communism is going to take over other European nations, as well as America, and therefore laws were put in place to rigorously stigmatize political opinions that were not deemed as democratic enough. These opinions, if caught, if a person believed in these anti-democratic opinions, would put them in jail for up to a lifetime, if caught. And overall, they caused lots of political stigmas with which people could not have dissenting opinions or beliefs of their very own. So with these political opinions, what we saw is a whole generation of people who were tired of the systematic oppression and the intolerance caused by the democratic state, leading to more movements such as the My Vote, My Voice movement, or the freedom of expression movement. And these opinions and beliefs and movements have all contributed to what we see as a more free society. We've experienced a time of great prosperity and political diversity and the status quo, all thanks to the dissolution of the USSR. And lastly, let's talk about how with the dissolution of the USSR, we've seen greater increases of international peace and prosperity, better foreign relations. Internationally speaking, trades with Russia have actually increased 39% according to tradestocks.com, and what we've also seen is that there has been a greater level of social democracy and prosperity overall and peace. Within our European counterparts, we've seen with all 15 countries who are part of the USSR, We have treaties and trade agreements with each of them. We are allies as America, and we've seen not only positives, but overall social stability and peace being perpetuated that we haven't seen previously throughout. So in conclusion, combined with the fact that there has been international help and international aid given to the USSR, but overall peace and prosperity, we see no other reason to show that after these 30 years, we've seen international prosperity given by the European Union in America with the fall of the USSR. Thank you.